What is going on, everyone? So it's been a minute actually since I've done a video on any Android device, and this one device specifically, the LG G5, is one of those phones that when it first came out I was like, this is going to be one of the most game-changing phones ever, and since then I think it's only gone downhill. No, I'm totally just joking, but there's a lot of controversy with this phone. It's been even since it's been released, but lately nobody really talks about it anymore. And really, I think LG phones, especially the G series, I think their V series is pretty decent, the V20s, V30s, V40s, but their G series has really kind of fallen off the map. It used to be like one of those crazy phones that when you thought of a phone that like kind of bezel-less at a time, that was one of the phones you thought of with the least amount of bezel. Going back even to the LG G2, that was one of those phones that really didn't have too much bezel going around it. And then slowly the G3 kind of added a little bit more of the G4, and I think it was around the G4, G5 era that LG kind of fell off. With the G6, I thought that was a pretty decent phone. Now the G7, again, like one of those phones that nobody really talks about. But we're going to take a look at the LG G5 in the later part of 2018. Now I've done one of these videos for the early 2018, one of those early still worth it's that I usually do, and I found it to be, you know, kind of in the middle of worth it and not worth it. I think the depreciation value for these phones has gone down. LG probably, I think, has the worst depreciation for any Android phone. Samsung Galaxies are pretty decent. Google Pixels are pretty decent. LG's phones, I mean, after like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, these phones like go half in value. It's insane. And the G5 is no exception. I'm pretty sure you can't even buy a G5 new anymore. You have to buy them used. But let's just look at this device and see how it's held up. Now, this phone was released in 2016 in February, so not that long ago, a little bit over 2 years. And this is one of those phones that's kind of in the middle of being bezel-less, but not really. I mean, no phone is really bezel-less if you think about it, except like maybe like the Essential phone or whatever, and possibly the new Galaxy S10. But this is one of those phones that definitely had smaller bezels on it. Now the bezel is kind of funny if you think about it, because on the lower part of the LG G5, okay, before I even get into that, the screen is pretty decent. It's an IPS panel. It's 5.3 inches. It's a pretty decent panel. I'll say it's 1440p. Now the weird thing is that it is an IPS panel, but it also has the ability to have the always on display, so you can have that functionality. Now it is IPS, like I said. I don't really like IPS, especially when there is an always on display option. You should just put an OLED panel on it. We can just have the battery saving functionality of an always on display. So it's kind of annoying, but that is what it is. It goes out the front camera. On the front, obviously, you have a charging port, you have a headphone jack, and on the back you have a dual camera setup as well as a fingerprint sensor, which is pretty nice, and that actually doubles as the power button as well. And the weirdest thing about this phone, and one of those things that I think really didn't tune to a lot of people, was the removable battery. Now, I don't really understand why they did it like this, but this phone was kind of modular in a way, so you're able to click a button and take off the whole bottom portion of the phone and replace the battery that way. Now, I don't know why they ever did this. I think it was like a cool theory, like really trying to differentiate itself from other phones at the time, but I don't really think it held up that well. Like when I think about it now, it's like that's just like one more part of a phone to break. Like you can easily misplace that part, and if you lost the back cover of like your LG G3 or G4, it's not the end of the world, you just get a new one. But this thing, I mean, that's the whole bottom portion of your phone. You can't even really operate a phone if you don't have that bottom portion of your phone, let alone all that functionality that stuff brings, and the battery. With the G4 or G3, if you just lost that plastic backing, you can easily just replace it like no big deal. Kind of funny, I don't know why they did that. They eventually did take it back out. They actually just sealed the battery in after this, so I think that was a smarter decision. I don't know why they ever did that. I think it was cool in theory. I think this was around the time where a lot of phone manufacturers were really pushing boundaries. I think Motorola did that. Moto Z Droid or Moto Z Force, that was all modular and everything. So this was kind of following in that same trend. Kind of funny. I don't really get it, but it is what it is. Now, it's probably the craziest hardware feature of it, kind of moving towards the software aspect of it. It started off getting Android Marshmallow. Now, luckily, this is unheard of for a lot of Android phones. It did actually get Android Oreo, which is 8.0. Now, it's actually just the last version of Android. We have Android 9.0 now. I don't think this LG G5 is getting Android 9.0. Believe it or not, I actually owned an LG G2 as my main phone for a very long time, for like at least like a year and a half, just like a couple years ago. And that phone, the custom ROM community behind it was insane. They were always pushing ROMs. I don't know if they're still doing that. I need to go on the LG G2 subreddit soon and linger back, because it's been so long since I've even been on that subreddit. But they were like posting custom ROMs left and right about that thing. I think Signage and Mod, either there was like official or unofficial build of that, but I was like flashing those like every day. Now, I wouldn't recommend everybody to do it, but if you do currently have an LG G5, if there's a custom ROM out there and there's a root out for it, just go root and custom ROM your phone, man. I mean, you get that much more functionality out of it, and it can really make your phone go from like a 4 out of 10 to like an 8 out of 10 easily, like in like a matter of seconds. So that's pretty awesome in and of itself. Now, in terms of the hardware aspect of it, it does have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 820. It has an Adreno 530 GPU and 4 gigs of RAM. Now, with those specs, I'll tell you right now, this phone is pretty decent at performance and everything. I mean, it was at the time I had it. It still is now. Because it didn't really get any software updates at all since like I made that last video, really the only software updates it's getting is through the App Store with the apps that it's supporting. And I'll tell you like this, I think this phone is pretty decent at everything you're going to throw at it. I mean, people have said some things about the Adreno 530, but in my opinion, I think the RAM in and of itself is a pretty big increase, or not even just an increase, but with 4 gigs of RAM, I mean, you can do a lot with that on an Android device, and you can only imagine what you can do that with an iOS device. But on Android, this is no exception. I mean, 4 gigs of RAM, you're gonna knock yourself in the face with how much better performance you could potentially get from it. Now, LG does have their UI, which is kind of annoying. It's not as in your face as Samsung's is, but Samsung recently just switched to the One UI, so I'm kind of interested. I haven't got my hands on it yet, but I really want to. But I'll tell you like this, in terms of performance, you're gonna not have any problems, I guarantee it. Heavier intensive apps, you could potentially run into some problems, but I don't really see how you would. With my apps, like I'm not a humongous like gamer or anything like that. My performance is pretty easy, so even gaming is perfectly fine too. So I'll tell you, in terms of everything, in terms of performance, you're gonna be perfectly fine. Don't even worry about it, especially on your usage. I've seen you use your phone before. I know you don't use your phone that much, so I'll just say, just keep that in the back of your head that, okay, performance is probably not going to be an issue. Now, one of the craziest things I forgot to even mention in the beginning of this video is that the LG G5 does have a micro SD card slot. Now, that is pretty crazy, right? But here's the even crazier part. You can put an up to 512 gigabyte, I know I said that wrong, SD card, micro SD card inside of it. So you could technically have you can have twice the amount of memory in your LG G5 than you can have in my MacBook. I have like 256 gigs in my MacBook Pro and I do everything with it. So you can have an LG phone that has twice the amount of storage of that, more than twice the amount of storage, which is insane. And I really hope phone manufacturers put SD cards in their phones again. I know a lot of them took them out. Imagine if Apple put SD card in their thing, dude, that'd be crazy. Now let's talk about the camera for a second, okay? I'll be honest, I think on my last video I kind of bashed it, but opinions change over time. I've been able to use the G5 since then, and I think the LG G5 does have a pretty decent camera. It has a 16 megapixel sensor in the back. It is a dual camera, like I said. The main sensor is 16 megapixels, the secondary lens is 8 megapixels, and I'll tell you, dude, like, the photos and everything, people will say they're whatever. I think they're pretty decent, okay? You are able to shoot 4K videos on it as well, but you're only able to shoot 4K at 30 frames and 1080p at up to 60 frames per second, which is kind of an annoyance. I mean, I would have expected a little bit more, especially out of a phone that came out in 2016. I mean, the iPhone 6s in 2015 was able to shoot 4K and a 1080p at up to 120 frames per second, I believe, maybe even more. So I really wish it did take it up a notch here in the camera department, but I think the camera is pretty decent what it is. The front camera is 8 megapixels, so again, and you're able to shoot 1080p at up to 30 frames on the front camera, so I think it's an overall pretty decent sensor. And you know, I'll let you guys kind of be the judge, but I think the camera is definitely a pro. It's not amazingly amazing. You might be a little dissatisfied with some photos here and there, but I think it's an overall pretty decent sensor in my opinion. Now moving on to something else that I kind of mentioned in the beginning of this video, the battery life, it's really not that good if I'm being honest. Okay, I know you hate me saying it, but this thing had a 2,800 milliamp hour battery. Now, like I said, it is removable, so that is a plus. So you can easily go and exchange it for whatever, but I just think the position of this battery just makes this phone degrade in my eyes just that much more. I think they should have just put a standard removable back on it. I think it's really awkward. I mean, like I said, it's just one more way to break your phone. And I don't know if you drop your phone, if that really damages that bottom part, if you're not able to take it in and out. But that is just one more way for me not to recommend this phone. It should have been a feature. In my eyes, it's really not that much of a feature, but battery life isn't horrible. I'll definitely say it's average. You will definitely probably have to charge your battery by the end of the day, because this is how I see it. Not only is the phone pretty performance heavy, but it also has a 1440p screen. The screen is kind of big. It's not a phablet or anything. Remember people used to say phablet all the time? It's not a phablet or anything, but it's pretty big. And it's also IPS, and if you utilize that always on display, you're going to be sucking up even more of that battery. So how I'll pretty much sum this phone is it's a decent package, but don't expect to get this phone and have your mind blown or anything like that. You know, I'll definitely say that this phone is still usable. It still has a lot of life left in it. I don't think it's getting any more software updates. I haven't really read any news about it getting Android 9.0. It could be not. I'm really unsure as of this point, but even if it does, I mean, that's kind of like one more reason to pick it up. What I'll say is I don't really have any inherent reasons to recommend you not picking it up, except for the reason that there are some cases where the LG G5 does boot loop. I wasn't even going to bring it up, but I think it is pretty important. People have said that for the G5 it really wasn't there too much. It was like the G4, G3, but I have heard stories of the G5 also boot looping and having touch disease problems potentially. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. So is that going to be a big enough reason to deter you from picking up this phone? I mean, you're going to have to ask yourself that question. I wouldn't say it's like Russian roulette in a way. I mean, it's not really like that with this phone, because chances are if you get it, you probably won't have any problems, but you potentially could. And that's one thing, like I want to have a phone that I'm secured with, that I'm not really afraid of like taking out places and everything. So what I'll say is the LG G5 still worth it in the later part of 2018? I'll say yes. I think it's still worth it. I think it has a life left in it, but you do kind of have to weigh the odds. Is it going to have problems in the future with the boot looping or touch disease? That's something you kind of have to keep inside your head and kind of, weigh the odds that way. But if you want to pick up an LG G5, I always try to find the lowest prices and link them in the description. So click on the first link I think is down there. If you want to buy LG G5 and help support the channel at the same time, I would really appreciate it. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, don't forget to check out the links in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel that is also linked down below. Also, if you want to enter the iPhone giveaway, I'm giving away 2 iPhones this month, like in December, not November, but December. Check out the first or second link in the description. It says enter iPhone giveaway. Go watch that video and find out how to enter. It's completely free, and I'd really appreciate if you guys could check that out too. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.